What's up, guys? It's the director, aka Jared Sage. Bros, we've got some Solo, a Star Wars story to talk about today. Got out of the movie last night, wanted to sit and digest it just a little bit, figure out what my emotions were. Ultimately, they're the same as when I walked out of the cinema. Just overall, I felt excitement. It was fun. It was a good movie. People were so soured from The Last Jedi, and I'm not going to get into that discussion, but there were some grounds to not be super stoked about the last Star Wars film. This film, however, I feel was marketed beautifully. I feel like Star Wars's biggest enemy was itself, was its IP. Everyone goes into these movies with the highest expectations, which ultimately really cannot be met. In my opinion, Disney may have leaked info about trialing shooting, problems in production, bad acting, etc., to lower everyone's expectations to a realistic level. This allowed viewers to go in open-minded with realistic expectations, and I feel that gave everybody an environment to really sit back, absorb, and enjoy the ride. Han Solo: A Star Wars Story can be summed up in one word, and that is fun. The energy, the action sequences, everything really came together for a fun and exciting adventure. That's something I feel really hit home with Solo. If I had to compare it with anything else in my childhood, it reminded me so much of the young Indiana Jones adventures. It doesn't really tie into the main structure of Star Wars in any heavy way, just like that series did, but it allows you to go on an adventure with your protagonist for the sake of excitement and adventure. Overall, guys, I'm super happy with the way this movie came out. I'm very stoked to see what the fan conversation is gonna be like in the next couple of weeks. But with that said, dudes, we're gonna get into spoilers. If you have not yet seen the movie, go watch it, man. I think you're gonna have a good time. Come back here, check out what my thoughts are on the film, and let's have a discussion in the chat, dudes. Spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You look good. A little rough around the edges, but good.
All right, guys, a broad view of the movie and my thoughts. The film starts off on Corellia, Han's home planet that we've heard so much about since the 70s. Corellia turns out to be this dark, trialing, slummy sort of area. I felt it was a great character building environment for the character of Han Solo. We find him in a similar environment he's always really been in, going up against Lady Proxima and her crime syndicate, which I thought was pretty cool. The reaction in the cinema was a little mixed when we first saw Lady Proxima come out of the water, this big worm-looking creature that spoke basic. And I felt it was awesome. It reminded me ultimately a lot of an episode of The Clone Wars or Rebels. It just felt genuine, like it wanted to be an episode that was all about Han, and it was going to be fun and reflect the character and the story that was being told there. Really loved Lady Proxima. Really cool character design. We also meet Qi'ra, Han Solo's romantic interest at this part of his life, and I felt it felt really genuine. At this point in the film, it seemed like they were, a combo group, that they were just going to stick together and conquer the galaxy and survive together, no matter what the odds. This kind of feels a little bit different towards the end of the movie, but we'll get into that a little bit later. In an effort to escape, Han makes it through the checkpoint on Corellia. Unfortunately, Qi'ra gets left behind. She gets caught at the very last second, which was a very intense moment. Him getting chased by the Lady Proxima crime syndicate, and the very last second, she's apprehended, which sucks. But it gives Han Solo some purpose for the rest of the movie. He wants to accomplish himself as a smuggler, make some money, grab a ship, come back, and rescue Qi'ra. In order to do this, his first step seems to be to join the Imperial ranks. He goes into a recruitment center and finds himself dubbed as Han Solo, because we don't really know his real last name. That was something I was kind of like, it could have been executed a little bit better. I don't know why he couldn't just always be Han Solo. Now he could be Han Brown, Han Witherspoon, Han. You guys get it. I felt like it was a little unnecessary. Anyway, he joins the Imperial ranks. He finds himself in the front lines with Beckett and other characters, and this is something that I felt was really well done. We got to see a little bit of Star Wars through the point of view of the Imperials, and this is something that we expected to see in Battlefront 2, but it wasn't executed very well. I wanted to see more of Star Wars through the Imperial eyes, but it felt wrong in Battlefront 2. Here we got to see some real gritty in the trenches war action. Han Solo, Beckett, the rest of the Imperials fighting their way through the rank. Like, it was awesome. I felt it was very, very well done. At this point, we get to see our first look at some of Beckett's crew. We get to know their personality and purpose, and they felt like a really great place to put Han Solo. You see Han Solo years later in A New Hope, the original trilogy, even the sequel trilogy, and you wonder what got him to that point as a human being, as a character. And seeing this ensemble of Beckett, his crew, felt like the appropriate environment for him to grow up in, at least to become the Han Solo we know and love later in the Star Wars trilogy. But as most character building events for Han Solo comes the betrayal, the first betrayal. He, trying to get on the ship with Beckett and his crew, gets thrown under the bus, and the Imperials take him into this cage where he first meets Chewbacca. And I thought that was such an amazing sequence. We're all waiting for the first time Han met Chewie, and it was such an important moment in the film. I felt they had to get it right no matter what. They let us to believe that he was going to be devoured by a Rancor. The way that they shot it, the sound design was spectacular throughout the whole film. And the first thing we see is this muddy, furry footprint enter frame, and it's Chewbacca, and they scuffle. And I love that the first time they meet, it's a battle, and you get to see the Imperials' point of view. They're rooting for Chewbacca to destroy Han, and then Han, speaking a little bit of Wookiees, convinces Chewbacca to work with him to get out of the cage. And it felt so cool that was the first way Han and Chewie interacted. It was somewhat selfish by Han because he wanted to get out, but Chewie needed him as well in order to escape. So it was an enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of situation, and it really worked out as far as establishing the relationship between Han and Chewie. It felt really, really good to see it go down that way. One of my favorite scenes in the movie by far. At that point, Han and Chewie join up with Beckett and their crew and get ready to perform their first heist. Now, in between all of this, we get to know the characters of Beckett, his crew, and I really began to feel at this moment in the film, this is the time I get to spend with characters, understanding where they come from, their point of view, and understanding the people that are surrounding Han Solo, again, that makes him who he is later on. And we'll herald back to this in just a second. The first heist that they undertake is stealing hyperfuel from a train somewhere. I forget what the name of the planet is. And I'll be honest, what an action sequence. That was intense. It was really cool seeing a heist go down in the Star Wars world. It just felt so awesome. Han Solo and the crew apprehending a train like an old Western film. Now, between it all, things get complicated as they always do in heist movies. Enter Enfys Nest. My first impression of Enfys Nest was turning to my wife and saying, "He's badass." We had no idea what he or she would later become further into the film. The action sequence on top of the train between Enfys and Beckett was super intense. The way that Enfys used the vibro staff and Beckett, it just felt so awesome seeing something so intense that didn't involve a lightsaber. And the character design of Enfys Nest was just absolutely stellar. One of my favorite characters from this movie by far. Really enjoyed it. It was the Boba Fett of this film. No, we don't get to see Boba in this movie, which kind of blows. But Enfys Nest was a really good substitute, at least for this point in Han Solo's smuggling career. In the turn for the worst, Beckett's crew ends up taking a couple casualties, which really, really sucked because I was super excited to see Han surrounded by these people for the remainder of the film. And it felt kind of touchy for me because we didn't get a lot of setup with these characters, a lot of get-to-know-you time with these characters, but I got enough where I wanted to see them prevail later on in the movie. And what was even stranger to me, after they lost the cargo, they lost a couple of crew members, we see Beckett for the first time absorbing everything that just happened. It seemed really brief, his moment of mourning. Like, it seemed super quick. He gives Han Solo a punch to the jaw, showing that he's intensely upset. Then after that, it's just kind of like, moving on to the next thing. And it felt a little off pace to me. That's one of the gripes I had with this movie, is that the editing and the pacing seemed a little off. It felt kind of all over the place. You're in this genuine moment for 1 second, and then the very next second you're jumping right into an action sequence, and it felt a little up and down too intensely. So they botched the mission. They lost the fuel. They've got to go make it up to Dreden Voss, one of the heads of the Crimson Dawn, one of the new crime syndicates introduced in this film. But in that, They go into this big, what is it, like space yacht, his big space yacht, where Han runs into Qi'ra again. And this is what I was talking about earlier in the review. Their relationship seems so genuine, so you and me versus the world sort of mentality. And when they meet up again, it seems kind of odd. Han obviously is shocked. He's like, oh my God, you're alive. How did you get off? I was coming back for you. This whole thing was for you. This whole thing was for me to come back and find you. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I got out of there. We're good. I mean, I'm not really out. There's some complications on the surface that you can kind of see, but there's so much beneath the surface that I can't tell you. And Han's like, okay, all right. And I'm like, wait a minute, Han. Based on your relationship at the beginning of the movie, it seemed like this moment should have been bigger than it was, and there should have been more retaliation to, okay, I accept what you're saying, rather than, I found you after all this time, this was the mission, let's get the hell out of here, you and me versus the world yet again. Just seemed kind of weird. But anyway, they meet up with Dreden Voss, he's ready to kill them for botching the mission. They promise to go grab that same hyperfuel, this time unprocessed, which is incredibly dangerous for whatever reason, and it's pretty much their last shot. They botch this mission, they're good as dead. Dreden Voss decides to send Qi'ra with them at this point, which I felt was going to allow us an opportunity to get into that conversation that I wanted to hear before, and we kind of do when they're in the cockpit with Lando's capes, which was hilarious. But they don't really get into it in the depth that I really wanted to, so that kind of stuck with me for the rest of the movie. Now at this point, they need a ship that can make the Kessel Run. We all know what's about to happen. How Disney presents it and how Disney makes us entertained by this information is another story. Enter Lando Calrissian as played by Donald Glover. Bros, the first moment I saw Lando on screen and he said his first line, I turned to my wife and I was like, this is Billy D reincarnate. I was so impressed with the way that Donald Glover adapted the character of Lando. It seemed like he put so much time into the little characteristics, the little movements, the inflections in his voice. Like, it just felt like Lando. And Alden Ehrenreich, I think is his name. I can't say his name, guys. I'm sorry. I'm going to botch it the whole review. Alden did a very good job as Han. I didn't find myself disappointed with his performance. I was convinced that he was Han Solo for most of the movie, but I didn't need him to be Harrison Ford, which was great. Donald Glover, on the other hand, as Lando, just embraced the character so genuinely that I was convinced from the get-go, this is Lando Calrissian. So let's step back. They have their sabacc match. This is what I was anticipating to be the sabacc match we've been hearing about for so long in Star Wars. The game that won Han Solo the Millennium Falcon. Loved what they did here. They added a small little twist where it didn't real quite go down the way we thought it would. The sabacc game goes sour for Han because Lando cheated, and I love that. It just adds more flavor to the characters that we've already known for a long time, but it just gives us more to love about them, gives us more to understand about that particular story. After botching the sabacc game, they convinced Lando to come with them, and I remember there was this small conversation Lando was having with Beckett, saying that he killed Aurra Sing, which is hilarious. I felt like, okay, what a small little Easter egg drop that holds a tremendous amount of significance. Because if anybody doesn't know, Aurra Sing was kind of the adoptive mentor or mother of Boba Fett. And we know Boba's had some news drop yesterday, so we'll get more into that later. But it was a kind of a fun drop that might herald to another film in the future. With Lando in their corner, they decide it's time to make the Kessel Run. The Kessel Run, for the longest time, was a topic of conflict and conversation for the fans, saying, well, parsecs aren't a unit of time, it's distance, which they make very much sense of in this movie. Basically, to get to Kessel, there's a very complicated route, a very complicated hyperspace route that you've got to navigate just to get there. The only reason they're able to navigate through there is with Lando's droid L3. She's got a very elaborate and advanced hyperspace route built into her database or something like that, and that's how they're able to approach. Now, when you get onto Kessel for the longest time I thought was this, asteroid clump, big asteroid where they process different spices. In the film, they decided to change it to an actual planet run by the Pike Syndicate. The Pike Syndicate, I was excited to see for the first time in the movie because I've seen them before in Star Wars Clone Wars. This is the first time I've seen them in live action. I thought it was a really cool adaptation. It reminded me so much because, okay, so let's step back for a second. There's a slave problem in the universe that we've heard about for so long. We saw Chewie enslaved earlier in this movie. We see a ton of slaves here on Kessel. It reminded me so much of a story arc in the Clone Wars. Anakin and Obi-Wan are taken slave on this planet, and it reminded me, so many of these scenes reminded me of that story arc in Clone Wars. It just felt like there was so much taken from the expanded universe stuff and the legend stuff and then the TV show and comic book stuff, that everything's starting to click, everything's starting to kind of come together as a cohesive unit. After infiltrating the Pikes headquarters or something like that, all of a sudden blasters go off and it's a full liberation of the droids. I thought this part of L3's character was hilarious. She was kind of annoying how much she brought up equal rights for like droids and stuff like that, but seeing this particular sequence of her removing restraining bolts from the droids and they're going crazy was hilarious. And this leads to a full liberation of all of the slaves on the planet, including Wookiee slaves. As Han and Chewie are going to pick up the hyperfuel, a bunch of Wookiee slaves are seen trying to fight their way out of the spice mines, and Chewie and Han look at each other, and Chewie's like, I gotta go take care of this. He's like, oh, do your thing, we'll meet up later, or whatever happens. And seeing the Wookiees come together to liberate themselves and to escape the facility was awesome. We haven't seen a Wookiee action sequence like this since Revenge of the Sith, the huge Kashyyyk battle, but seeing it in this context where the Wookiees are fighting for their freedom was refreshing, because we've heard so much about Wookiee slavery. We've heard so much. We've seen Chewbacca was a ranked Wookiee like what, 20 years before in Revenge of the Sith. He was fighting alongside Yoda and Tarful, and it was insane to see him enslaved at the beginning of this movie. And now we get to see more of the Wookiees going through the same thing. And to see them fight their way out, to see the battle with the Wookiees again was super refreshing. We also got to see Chewbacca rip some arms off, which was hilarious. We were supposed to see it, I think, in The Force Awakens, but they ended up cutting it out. So I'm glad it made its way into this film. Another question I had at this part of the film was, I was expecting to see R2 and 3PO in this sequence, because if you remember in A New Hope, they mentioned that their previous master had them stationed on the spice mines of Kessel. And we all know that we've seen R2 and 3PO in every single Star Wars movie prior to this. Where were they in this movie? It was an excellent opportunity to just insert them very quickly. I think the biggest problem is not everybody's going to remember that line from A New Hope, that where they were stationed on Kessel at that point. So it might have been like, why are 3PO and R2 there? But I was fully expecting to see that, and maybe even some Boba Fett action, but who knows. Now this is the point where things get really, really intense. This is the launch of the Kessel Run, the actual Kessel Run that we've heard about for so long. Things get complicated. They're on their way off the planet. L3 has been blown up, and Lando is like, he's all destroyed over it. This is the first time we get to see Han behind the wheel of the Millennium Falcon. He finds out that Chewie is a competent co-pilot, and they take the wheel together for the first time as Han and Chewie, pilot and co-pilot of the Millennium Falcon. Apprehended by the Empire, they need to take a shortcut through, I think it's called the Maw, a very dangerous area of space, pretty much a short. We mentioned before that the hyperspace route was very complicated to get to Kessel, so to take any sort of shortcut was pretty much considered suicide. If things weren't already complicated enough traveling through this dangerous space, the ship breaks down or something for a moment, the lights go out, and they turn on the light, and there's this huge space monster. We don't know what it is. I have no idea what that is. If you guys know what that space creature is, please let me know in the comments section below. And all of a sudden, this navigation through dangerous space turns into a chase between them and this huge creature. And to add to the complication of that, there's this like black hole or collapsing star or something pulling them into its gravitational pull, and they trick the monster into following the escape pod into the black hole. And now it becomes, we got to get out of the gravitational pull as the monster's trying to get out, as we're trying not to get eaten. Now, before I go any further into that, something that really caught my eye in this scene that really reminded me of something I loved in Rebels was a story arc where the Rebels are trying to find the planet of Zeb. Here's a clip from the show. Now, it does look a little bit different, but there are a lot of similarities here. The biggest thing in this episode was their ability to use the Force or some sort of mystic power in order to travel through the Maw, which is where they're able to find the home planet of Zeb. Kind of a cool little Easter egg there. I think, well, they might have even called it the Maw in the show, So I'm not quite sure if that's exactly what it was. I'm not sure if that's the exact same area or the exact same idea, but it just reminded me so much of that sequence from Rebels. So the Kessel Run capped off by an amazing hyperspace jump through like this crevice similar to what we see in Empire Strikes Back. We have a second to breathe. We have a second to process what had just happened. And speaking of process, their next destination is a planet where they can process this raw hyper fuel. Now, this is where the movie starts coming to a close, and it's very important the events that happen from here on out. Just as they're ready to deliver all of this fuel to Dreden Voss, who shows up other than Enfys Nest. Now, something here happens that I wasn't expecting. Enfys Nest says, we are kind of on the same side here. I'm gonna show you who I really am to see if we can gain some trust. Takes off her mask and shows that she's some kid. She's some kid that's trying to start a rebellion. And she wants Chewie and Han's help in order to fund it through this hyperfuel that they just picked up. Now, conflicted, Han has to make a decision. Do we get out of this with our lives and a lot of money? Or do we do the right thing and fight for the freedom of all peoples of the galaxy? Kira has a small conversation with him in which she says, you're kind of the good guy in this whole story. Han's like, nah, no, I'm not. I'm not the good guy. She's like, no, you are. And this is a moment that you can prove to yourself who you really are. And Han takes this information and makes the most important decision of the movie, which leads into the first twist. He has a conversation with Beckett saying, listen, I think the route here is to get rid of the hyperfuel without notifying Voss what's going on, as well as helping this new rebellion led by Enfys Nest. Beckett says, no, we're good. You know, I'm gonna get out of here while I can. You guys, good luck to whatever you do, but this is not where I belong. And Beckett takes off. Well, as they're tricking Voss into delivering the hyperfuel, Beckett does make a return saying, oh, you should never have trusted me. I tipped him off. He knows everything. And that's something I didn't really love. It was the first twist, but I kind of saw it coming. I kind of knew, especially from the trailer where he says, don't trust anybody. Everybody will betray you. I was like, okay, well, we knew it was going to be you when you walked in through that door. But the twist of the twist that threw me off that I actually enjoyed was that Han knew that Beckett was going to betray him. Han knew that he was going to have to deal with this, and he planned everything out. He brought the real hyperfuel to Voss, and then they had to adjust what they were doing from there. He convinced Beckett to gun down all of the protection that Voss had around him. He took the hyperfuel with Chewie and decides to get out of there. And I was like, okay, cool. I like this twist. I like that the predictability was there, but also the unpredictability in what Han was planning all along. There's a scuffle, a showdown, a small battle between Dreden and Han Solo, and ultimately it comes down to Kira holding the blade above Solo saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to betray you. And then the other twist that I wasn't stupendously stoked about, because we know Han's not going to die, she turns over and stabs Dreden, and she's like, I had this figured out all along. And you're like, okay, well, wasn't the payoff I was really hoping with that scene, but it works. It works. She tells Han to take off. He's got to go take care of Chewie, and he has a confrontation with Beckett in which it results in a Han shot first moment. Beckett's like, oh, well, I'm going to teach you one last and he gets shot. Han has the fuel, and that's supposedly all wrapped up. But the biggest thing of this movie, just like in Rogue One, like Rogue One was this big epic action film. It was great, but there's that one scene in Star Wars story films that blows everybody away, and it happened again in Solo, A Star Wars Story. Kira calls up the head of the Crimson Dawn, says, oh, things went south, Dreden's dead, what are we gonna do now? And the camera pans around this hologram that she's speaking to, and you see this hooded figure, and I don't remember what he says, but I remember hearing the voice. And I was so amped with excitement, I turned over to my buddy and I grabbed his arm. I turned over to my wife, I grabbed her arm, and I was like, is this really happening? We see the robotic legs for just a moment before he takes off his hood, and it's Darth freaking Maul. Never in a million years did I think we would see Darth Maul, or Maul now we should refer him to, ever make a return to the live action films. So many people in our cinema was like, what? What? And obviously they haven't seen Rebels or Clone Wars or any of the comic books, so they were just in complete shock. I was flipping out, everybody was flipping out. Some people I've heard reviews from have been talking about, this is probably too confusing for the non-extra stuff fanboys, people that don't watch the extra shows and the comic books. To me though, I was like, nah, I think that's awesome. Because I remember my first time when I saw Darth Maul come back in Clone Wars, I felt that same way. I was like, he's not dead. And they get to experience that now, but in a different context. Now, Maul says something about, we have to regroup, this is disappointing, you're gonna bring that ship and meet me back on Dathomir, and where we're gonna figure out the next step of our plan. Oh my god, guys, I think we might see either a Darth Maul Star Wars story film, or he's gonna be the main antagonist in another Star Wars story film. It could even be a part 2 of the Han Solo Star Wars. Like, it feels like they set this movie up for a sequel, maybe. Which, honestly, I'd be super okay with seeing. Like, at first, everyone was like, no, we don't need a Han Solo movie. And now I'm like, I think I really want a sequel. Now, we're gonna wrap up the events of the film, and we're gonna come back to the Darth Maul stuff here in just a second. So, Han and Chewie get away. They get one little thing of hyperfuel after they given the rest over to Enfys Nest, and they go track down Lando Calrissian, and that's where we get to see the sabacc game that we've heard about so much. He understands that Lando had been cheating last time. He's able to apprehend the cards up his sleeve, and he's able to win the Falcon fair and square this time. Pretty cut and dry. It was a funny way that they filmed it. I loved the "Hano, buddy, how you doing?" You know, like, just the same way we saw in Cloud City. It's like, hey. We good? Han and Chewie take the Falcon and they go off to find the crime lord on Tatooine Beckett told them about previously. And obviously that sets up his career with Jabba the Hutt. Then roll credits, directed by Ron Howard. Ron, you did a fantastic job. You really delivered with this movie. Very, very satisfied. Now, before we wrap up this review, I want to talk a little bit about what is Maul doing in this movie. He doesn't fit. This was the last person I expected to see in this film. What is Maul doing here? Well, at this point, Maul has been around for a while. He was found by his brother Savage, who's another Zabrak kind of Sith warrior. Not really a Sith, but he's a lightsaber-wielding, force-wielding warrior. And he brings him back to Dathomir, in which the Night Sisters somewhat resurrect him. And that's where he starts his campaign of revenge on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Throughout the entire Clone Wars, you see them battling it out, but there's never really a resolution in that particular series. He starts a crime syndicate. Again, all of this is to get to Obi-Wan. He becomes very powerful, and then he later decides to cut ties with the crime syndicate part of things and take over Mandalore, in which he does kill Obi-Wan's love interest. But after that, he gets his butt royally whooped by Sidious, who finds out he's still alive. We don't really see Darth Maul after that. There's a long period of time that we don't know what's going on until he shows back up again in Rebels. At this point, Darth Maul had been looking for Sith artifacts for whatever reason. It just seems like a way to find out how to kill Obi-Wan. He's been on this journey for a while where he meets up with Ezra Bridger. He finds a young boy who he feels he can make an apprentice out of to become more powerful, and that's where we kind of pick up with him. Obviously, there's a resolution later in the series. I've already said a lot that pertains to Clone Wars and Rebels. If you guys haven't seen those shows, I would highly, highly recommend doing so. But we know what happens to Maul throughout the remainder of Rebels, but there is that time between Clone Wars and Rebels that we don't really know what he was up to, and I feel like this is that space and time we're gonna figure out a brand new story to show what Maul's been doing. He's probably the antagonist of a separate story now, and I'm really, really excited to see him come back. There's no way that they are gonna drop Darth Maul into a live-action Star Wars movie without some sort of plans to use him later. Very, 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 very cool cameo. One of my favorite moments out of all of the new Star Wars movies. Absolutely ecstatic to see him make his return into the live-action films. Now, overall thoughts, Solo: A Star Wars Story was awesome. You know, I would give it like a 7.5 out of 10, like really, really, really solid movie. Very exciting, very fun, and ultimately fit the feel and the story of Han Solo and Star Wars in general. But the biggest question I'm asking, other than Darth Maul, is where is Boba Fett? I felt like this would be the perfect movie to bring Boba Fett back into the limelight. He's been Han Solo's main nemesis for the longest time. I really, really wanted to see Boba. That being said, I feel like there's a sequel coming. I feel like there's more to say. I feel like Darth Maul is going to be around for another movie. I feel like Han Solo is going to come back for another movie. And I feel like I wouldn't be too upset if Boba Fett made his entrance in that sequence, in that part of the trilogy maybe. We also know that Boba Fett has his own film as well, up and coming, directed by James Mangold, director of films like 3:10 to Yuma and Logan. There's a lot more Star Wars to come, dudes. What did you dudes think of Solo: A Star Wars Story? Were you satisfied? Was it underwhelming? Let's start a conversation in the comments below, guys. I'm super excited with how this movie turned out. I'm very, very happy with how they executed it. Ron Howard definitely delivered. And I'm just absolutely stoked to see where they take Star Wars from here. I know a lot of people were upset about The Last Jedi, but I hope that this film has brought faith back, that Star Wars can be Star Wars the way that we've hoped it would be since the beginning. Thank you guys for joining me so much. This is the director, aka Jared Seach. We'll see you next time, and as always, stay frosty.